All right, it is true. I have to admit, I do have a son. My admiration for this man and what he's done and what he's built is so deep that I named my son Saul. It is true. What is even more surprising is that I named his younger brother BIF. First part is true. So Saul calls me up about a year ago and says, hey, do you want to come to BIF 7? I said, sure, I got nothing else to do. Why not? And he said, what am I supposed to do? He says, I want you to tell a story. I said, a story? About what? He said, you can talk about anything you want. You can talk about anything you want. And I thought about that. Anything I want? And I said, well, I got an idea. Maybe I should, as you can see from, you might not know this, I live in Washington, D.C. And as you can see from looking at me, I am a man. I'm not sure why there are women laughing at that, but that's my own problem. So I am from Washington, D.C., and I am a man. And I thought maybe I should just stay true to my geography and my gender and talk about myself. But then I said, no, let's not do that. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about, I want to tell you a story. It's a story about innovation. It's a story about these two guys right here. These two guys. Who are these two guys? These are Andrei Geim and Konstantin Novoselov. Andrei Geim and Konstantin Novoselov, which raises the question, who are Andrei Geim and Konstantin Novoselov? 11 months ago, these guys won the Nobel Prize in Physics. They won the Nobel Prize in Physics. They isolated something called graphene. Graphene, this is amazing. Graphene is a substance that is 1 atom thick. 1 atom thick, but is 50, 60 times the strength of steel. Andrew's talking about the possibility space. Whoa, wait a second. Can you really, is that even possible? It seems almost fantastical. Here's how two physicists describe this breakthrough in the New York Times. He said what graphene is. He said, if scaled up to the thickness of plastic refrigerator wrap, a sheet of graphene stretched over a coffee cup would support the weight of a truck bearing down on a pencil point. All right, not bad, guys. All right, this is one of the biggest breakthroughs in material science in the last half century. So what I want to talk about in this story about Geim and Novoselov is how they did this. How do you do this? There are a lot of smart people out there, but this is pretty good, right? This is really smart, all right? There are a lot of smart people, but they don't win the Nobel Prize, and they don't do this. So how'd they do that? I'm going to pick up on that story in a moment, but to sort of give it a little bit of, sort of pull back a little bit in the tail here, let me ask a question, okay? I'm going to come back to them in a moment. How many of you have an iPad? Okay? How many of you knew 18 months ago you were missing an iPad? Okay? You're laughing at that, but if we look at this thing right here, this is much lighter than I expected. I was expecting marble, Saul. We look at what is innovation. Innovation is, in some sense, giving the world something you didn't know was missing. That's what a lot of the innovators up here have been doing. That's what Citizen School has been doing. That's what Dennis Lippke's doing at Big Picture Schools. A lot of you are in the business of giving people something they didn't know they were missing. A lot of us want to do that. That's in some ways what innovation is. That is an incredibly elegant form, as Whitney was saying, of disruption. Giving people something they didn't know they were missing. So it turns out that there's a little bit of research on how people do this. Who gives people things they don't know they're missing? That's what artists do. To me, this is the cognitive skill of artists. That's what storytellers do. That's what painters do. That's what sculptors do. That's what poets do. That's what dancers do. They give the world something you didn't know was missing. So why do artists do these kinds of things? There's a little bit of research on that. I'm just going to give you one quick study on this. It's going to give us a little bit of hint into the mystery of Geim and Novoselov. It's a study done of artists, painters and sculptors. 23, done by a remarkable researcher named Teresa Mabile. She should be here next year. Teresa Mabile at Harvard Business School. You might have heard of it. She did this interesting study a few years ago of artists, painters and sculptors. And here's what she did. She got 23 painters and sculptors. She had them select 10 of their commissioned works and 10 of their non-commissioned works. 10 of their commissioned works, 10 of their non-commissioned works. So it's 23 artists, 20 works of art. Got it? That's 460 works of art. She presents these 460 works of art to a panel of art experts. They don't know where the works of art came from. Art historians, museum curators, gallery owners, etc. They say, evaluate these works of art. Evaluate these works of art, these 460 works of art. They don't know where they came from. Evaluate these works of art. Here's what she writes. Our results were quite startling. Now, as Valdez knows as a social scientist, and if those of you who read social science know, this is about as exuberant as these guys get. Okay, so results were quite startling. Here's what she found out. The commissioned works were rated as significantly less creative than the non-commissioned works, yet they were not rated as different in technical quality. In other words, the commissioned works and the non-commissioned works, on the technical quality, they were pretty similar. They were good. These are people making a living in the fine arts. You got to be really freaking good to make a living in the fine arts, okay? Technical quality was the same, but over and over again, it was the non-commissioned works that were rated more creative by people who didn't know the source of the creation. It's kind of curious. She goes back and she talks to these artists, because you would think conventional view would be, hey, listen, you're going to get $1,000 for this painting, you're going to do a good job. And the other one, you're just splattering paint on a canvas, who knows what's going to happen? And yet, what the artist said is that, well, they're commissions and commissions. A few constraints are fine, but once you get past a certain number of small constraints, it's no longer my artwork. It belongs to someone else. So I'm going to be compliant, I'm going to be technically good, but I'm not going to be great because it's too constraining. And I need to remove those constraints. Few are okay. I need to remove those constraints in order to do great work. That non-commissioned work is the pathway to the real breakthroughs. Kind of curious. Now, why am I talking about this? Because if you look at most workplaces in North America or Europe, anywhere, if you look at most workplaces, there's no non-commissioned work. Everything people do on the job is commissioned work. Seems kind of silly, but that's changing. Let me give you some examples of this. Just an example you might know. Atlassian, it's an Australian software company. They do something really cool. Once a quarter on Thursday afternoons, they say to their software developers, go work on anything you want. Do whatever you want, do it the way you want, do it with whomever you want. The only thing we ask is that on Friday afternoon, you show what you've created to the rest of the company in this fun, freewheeling meeting. They call these things FedEx days, because you have to deliver something overnight. Turns out that this one day of intense, undiluted autonomy has led to a whole array of fixes for existing software, new ideas for products, improvements to internal processes. Okay? Wow, what a crazy Australian company this is. And yet, anybody, but this is an idea that is spreading. This is an idea that is spreading. If you look on the fringes, you see ideas that are spreading. Anybody from Dallas, by any chance? Okay, somebody, so you're going back to Dallas? If you want to go to Dallas, maybe you want to stop by Frito-Lay headquarters in Dallas tomorrow, because Frito-Lay is doing its first FedEx Day. Anybody, here's the New York Times. Just, I want to say for everybody under 40, the New York Times also comes in this format. This is the New York Times. It's an interview with this dude right here. His name is Andrew Thompson. He's the CEO of Proteus, a biotech company, biomedical company. What do you do for innovation? One other thing we do is called a FedEx Day. This seems to be spreading a little bit. Let me give you another example. Let's talk about Twitter. We've heard that phrase, we've heard that name, constantly, Twitter. Twitter in October did what it called a hack week. 1 week. They said, stop working on what you usually work on whatever you want for a week. It turns out that, having been to Twitter headquarters a couple of months ago, most of the innovations that Twitter has rolled out in the last 3 months, and will continue to roll out for the rest of the year, emerged from this hack week. Let me give you another example. Here's a company, Intuit. Intuit's another software company. Intuit makes TurboTax and Quicken and those kinds of things, and Intuit has had a challenge in recent years. Back in the old days, people used to buy software in shrink-wrapped boxes. Or remember that software in shrink-wrapped boxes? I mean, you should. It was like 4 years ago, right? All right. But now nobody buys software that way. They want it downloadable on their computer. So Intuit makes this big change to make their software downloadable. Oh, woohoo, high fives all around. Uh-oh, suddenly they start listening to their customers. Hey, I want my Quicken on my iPad. I want my TurboTax on my BlackBerry. Suddenly they have to put it on their mobile devices. Big change, okay? Big organizations turn slowly. That's one reason they get disrupted by smaller enterprises that are willing to disrupt. So Intuit has something called 10% time. People can spend 10% of their time working on whatever they want. Now, it sounds all lovely and Woodstocky and summer of love and follow your bliss, but the companies that have started doing this aren't signing away the intellectual property rights to what's created during these 10% time, which is smart. Here's what the head of innovation, remember, it's the I in BIF. The I in my son's name, BIF. Here's what the head of innovation told me not too long ago. After our CEO declared mobile was key to our strategy, none of our business units were able to change direction on a dime, but our employees using 10% time created 7 mobile apps before any other formally funded mobile projects even got started. Famous example, of course, is this company here, Google. Everybody knows this. Google, being Google, has to go even bigger. 20% time, all right? Anybody ever look at Google News? Google News scared the hell out of the American newspaper business. Not an official project, 20% project. Everybody here has a Gmail account. Gmail is not an official project, it was a 20% project. Here's what one Google engineer says. Just about all the good ideas here have bubbled up from 20% time, which makes you wonder what they're doing the other 80%. But, no, to be fair, there's an answer to that. What they're doing the other 80% is commissioned work. Google, 20% non-commissioned work, 80% commissioned work. Intuit, 90% commissioned work, 10% non-commissioned work. Twitter, 51 weeks of commissioned work, 1 week of non-commissioned work. Atlassian, 4 days of non-commissioned work, 361 days of commissioned work. I was trying to think whether this was a leap year. You see a pattern here, okay? So that leads us back to these guys. Andrei Gheim and Konstantin Novoselov. They have a laboratory in the University of Manchester in the United Kingdom. It's a busy laboratory. They have written grants to get funding for their research. They have papers that are due. But at this laboratory, they have lots of work. At this laboratory, from its inception, they've always carved out time for what they call Friday evening experiments. Friday evening experiments. For a few hours every week, about 10% of the time, a few hours every week, often on Friday nights, because they're physicists. They work on stuff they're interested in. The only rules are these. Number one, it can't be anything you have funding for. Can't be anything you have a paper due. And as Novoselov says, you're allowed to do whatever you want as long as it's not boring. These Friday evening experiments. They made their breakthrough on graphene not in their official work, but in their Friday evening experiments. They made their breakthrough on graphene in their non-commissioned work. They won the Nobel Prize in Physics. All right? That's pretty good. If my son Saul called me up in 25 years and said, "Hey, Dad, I just won the Nobel Prize in Physics," I would say, not bad, right? They won the Nobel Prize in Physics for their non-commissioned work. All right? You see a pattern here? So this is my ask. This is my ask here, all right? What I want you to do in your own life is this. Carve out some time for non-commissioned work. Whether you're a soloist or a small entrepreneur or whether you work in a large organization, this is where the world is going. The world is going, the structure of work is going to the part where this will be normal before too long. That some part of our work, week, our work month, our work year, is going to be non-commissioned work. It seems inevitable. It's moving quickly right now. This is where the breakthroughs happen. This is where the breakthroughs happen. But there's going to be resistance. There's going to be resistance, and the resistance is going to be on a front that we've talked about here. I just put this in. I hear so much about the Boston Red Sox. I wanted to put a picture of the real team, the Washington Nationals, who are now tied for third. All right? Here's what I want. Here's my warning to you about this. Here's my warning to you about this. This has some problems. See this right here? That's a guy named Andrei Gheim, who we met earlier. He's accepting another award up there. He's accepting an award called the Ig Nobel Prize. In 2001, he won the Ig Nobel Prize. Now, if it begins with Ig, you know it's not good, right? The Ig Nobel Prize, this, as many of you know, is a prize given for silly science, for stuff that seems ridiculous, for stuff that makes people want to cut federal funding in the United States to research. Crazy stuff. What are they talking about, these crazy eggheads, especially this guy who was born in the Soviet Union? What are we doing here? So they give him a prize for ridiculousness. He won that in 2001, and he won it for an experiment where he said, All of us are living beings, and living beings are comprised of atoms, and are comprised of molecules, and molecules are comprised of atoms, and atoms have electrons, and electrons really don't like magnetic fields too much. So theoretically, if you put a living being in a magnetic field powerful enough, then the electrons in that being's body will repel the magnetic field, and they will kind of magically lift from the ground. So he did an experiment in which, we'll see whether this works, he decided to put a frog in a giant magnetic field to see if it would levitate. Now, can we, back in let's see if this works. Here we go. It did! What a breakthrough! The frog is levitating. Now, I should just point out that no amphibians were harmed in the filming of this. Wow! Isn't that great? Good God. I mean, if my son called me up and said, "Hey, Dad, I just levitated a frog," I would say, "Talk to your mom." All right? But this is the nature of this kind of enterprise. Here's Novoselov again. 90% of those Friday evening experiments don't work. That's kind of the point. In order to get to the stuff that does work, you got to do a lot of stuff that doesn't work. You can't have it both ways. And this is really important to remember and very consistent with a lot of what everybody else has said already. Let me end on this. Here's what Andre Gahn, Nobelist, says. Human progress has always been driven by a sense of adventure and unconventional thinking. And that's nice. But here is the moral of their story. The moral of their story, perhaps the meaning of this, the message of this conference, and perhaps the meaning of life. I'm distantly related to the Chopras. There were a few Stettles in India. You didn't, the moral of this story, the message of this conference, maybe the meaning of life is this. If you really want to change the world, you need to levitate some frogs. Thanks.